Hey everyone, James here with the Wisdom of Delivery Men. I'm going to do another quick video here. Just going to talk about the migration crisis, both in the United States and Europe, but I'm going to take a different angle on it. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the fact that no one wants to talk about, no one on the right wants to talk about, no one on the left wants to talk about, which is the extreme irony that all these developed countries, the United States, Canada, France, England, Germany, Italy, etc., are now having to deal with the consequences, the human consequences and the economic consequences of their own actions. Specifically, the multi-generational wealth transfer from third world countries, South America and sub-Saharan Africa, specifically from those countries into the developed countries. This has been an ongoing trend that has been occurring since the end of colonialism, and if you want to include colonialism in it, that's fair as well, because the entire point of colonial possessions and domains was to siphon resources, wealth, and manpower out of them into the mother country. At the expense of the colonies. There was some limited development that went on. It really varied where you went. The French did very well at developing their colonies, especially in West Africa, building schools and so forth. But overall, the point of colonialism was a multi-generational wealth transfer out of the third world into the developed world, into the host country. And that continued after the fall. The last colonial possession was Mozambique, when Portugal pulled out in the late 1970s. And the political leadership structure definitely changed in these countries. But the way that the economy functioned and the overall sieve of wealth from the third world to the first world did not stop. And there were times that it maybe stabilized, but overall it never stopped. And yes, when you think about this, you immediately think about natural resources, but what you really want to think about is capital. What you really want to think about is crippling loans that were given to these countries that they have to pay back, to the point that many of these countries that people are fleeing from, over 35% of the budget goes to paying interest to foreign creditors like Credit Suisse, JP Morgan, the big banks, etc. And so this was a multi-generational thing. It was a wealth transfer, meaning that the people in these countries literally got poorer, and the people in the developed countries literally got richer because of this. Another good example would be smartphones. All the components that make up the innards of smartphones require specialized minerals like coltan, barite, etc. And those are only found in sub-Saharan Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, West Africa, and they are mined there by companies that are owned by people in first world countries. The workers are paid very limited amounts, so the overall wealth that mineral resource generates, right, even though coltan is extremely valuable, the overall wealth that it generates, very little of it actually stays in that home country where it's mined. Most of it actually goes to the end node, the trade end node, which would be France, the United Kingdom, the United States. So this wealth transfer process has been happening all over the world. It's not just the Western countries that have done it. Russia has done it. China has done it extensively. Any developed country has done it. That's the way that developed countries, one of the ways that they've gotten so rich, is that they've taken resources and they've taken wealth from the third world. Now, there's other things too, but the wealth transfer is a big part of it. Well, things only work for a certain period of time. You're only going to be able to transfer wealth and destroy third world economies to a point before they essentially effectively collapse and people have to leave those countries. Now, for the last 25 years, these countries were basically on the border of collapsing. Their economies were on the borders of collapsing, but they weren't bad enough that people were actually going to leave and go on these incredible, arduous, long journeys in order to find better economic fortunes for themselves, which is the primary reason everyone's going. In 9 out of 10 cases, when they talk about political asylum, that's just to get into the country. There are some isolated cases where people are leaving because of civil war or political oppression, but mainly it's economic. And if you talk to the people, especially firsthand, they'll admit that it's economic. And what has happened is in the last 5 years with COVID, and especially with inflation of global goods, and with the rise of kind of the new hyper technical economy, where you're basically just anyone in anywhere is just scratching by unless you're in these really high tech professions. These economies in the third world have just completely collapsed for a lot of people. There's a shell economy that benefits the elites and benefits certain classes in those economies, but the overall economy is collapsed to the point like we've seen in Venezuela, where people are spending an entire month's wages just on food. In sub-Saharan Africa, where people can't even purchase food, it's not even available because there's no functional trade system to get the food from the farms to some of these rural areas, because there's just not enough profit in it. It makes more economic sense to ship that food off and sell it on the international market and sell it at places like Whole Foods in the United States. So those economies have collapsed, and so the most marginalized people, right, are hurt the most. So the most marginalized people are going to immediately be in trouble, but not all of them can migrate because the migration process is extremely expensive. So what has been happening, if you look at the data, is that the most marginalized in these countries are really taxing the limited social services they are. But more commonly, what they're doing is they're taking middle class jobs at extremely discount rates. So I'm going to be a construction worker, which is a middle class job, but instead of getting paid $2 a day, I'm going to take 20 cents a day because I'm so desperate. And what this has done is this has priced out the middle class. So the middle class is facing this intense economic competition from the classes below them, and then they're also feeling the same pain of inflation and the wealth transfer, etc. So the migration that's coming is largely from the middle classes. It takes $10,000, $8,000, $15,000 to actually make these journeys. So it's actually the middle class that's making this journey by and large. And that's the irony of it, right? Is that the countries that are receiving these people are the exact same countries that caused this problem. They're the exact same countries that started this wealth transfer in the first place. And it's not random. I mean, if you're leaving West Africa, right, which is a French-speaking country, your goal is to get to France because it's a French-speaking country. If you're in a former Italian position, you're trying to get to Italy because you speak Italian. Now, in the European case, a lot of people want to go to Germany, a lot of people want to go to England. But the point is that you want to go to one of these countries that actually caused your economic problems in the first place. And it's the same thing in the United States. I mean, the United States is experiencing record migration from Latin America. All the countries in Latin America, the economies are linked to the United States and have largely been wrecked by policies and wealth transfer policies of the United States that go back to the 1890s. So again, the United States is having to face and deal with the results of its own actions. There are some bizarre outliers, like uptick in Chinese immigration into the United States. The United States had very little to do with China's economic problems. There's lots of immigration from Afghanistan and Central Asia into Europe, and similarly, the economic problems of Central Asia have to do with Russia, have nothing to do with Europe. But again, overall, the irony of this whole migration crisis that just you choke on is that these countries, these developed countries, liberals and conservatives, are complaining about the results of their own policies. So this is not a solution, but if you're going to blame people, or if you're going to turn around and demonize people for migrating, you should demonize yourself for creating these policies in the first place.